Screen West, and the Lotteries Commission of Western Australia. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Nkrumah's hopes for colonial independence had begun during World War II. United States President Franklin Roosevelt had secured from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill a promise that all nations of the world would be allowed to chart their own political course. Churchill didn't realize it at the time, but it was the beginning of the end for European colonialism.
A new power was on the world scene, the United States of America. And it faced a world which had already been containerized by the European powers. And it said, open up, unlock, we want in. And that unlocking was independence from the American point of view.
As World War II drew to a close, the United Nations was formed. It would provide a forum where nations could meet to address issues of mutual concern. Among the founding principles of this new organization was a declaration of support for political freedom and independence. The colonial powers of Europe vastly underestimated the power this would have.
When I first joined the UN in 1945, I was astonished at particularly the British Foreign Office. And people would say, well, decolonization is a small matter, you know, it'll 100 years, 150 years, maybe. Well, actually, it took 20.
Colonialism, of course, is the absolute enemy of open economies and of free trade. Colonialism is about anything. It's about managing economies and restricting access, either formally or informally. And it emphasizes the importance of Africa as a producer of raw materials.
Known to Europeans and Americans for centuries as the Dark Continent, Africa represented a place of exotic animals, strange people and customs, and sometimes unimaginable wealth. The continent existed as much in the imagination as it did in reality. By the late 1880s, European nations had colonized virtually all of Africa. In 1884, they met in Berlin to draw up the political boundaries of their colonies. These boundaries seldom had much to do with the realities of Africa.
This, of course, meant that in some instances they split peoples. In other instances, it meant that people who had been fighting each other before the map was drawn were now put into one administrative unit. Of course, the Europeans could all play on that in order to keep the peace.
During the Second World War, the Europeans had recruited their colonial subjects to the war effort. African conscripts were not always well treated. In 1948, in the Gold Coast's capital, Accra, disgruntled ex-soldiers demonstrated for fair pay for their wartime service. A number were shot and killed by colonial police, sparking riots across the country. One of those imprisoned without trial in the aftermath of the rioting was Kwame Nkrumah. He had just returned from England to be General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention Party. Nkrumah's arrest instantly transformed him into a national hero. The Gold Coast was one of the richest colonies in Africa. Diamonds, gold, and cocoa were its main exports. Its early history was dominated by the slave trade. Nkrumah himself came from a small village near the old slaving forts of Elmina. In the 1930s, he managed to make his way to the United States to study. While in the U.S., he was influenced by African-American scholars and black nationalist pioneers.